Hey guys, Toby Mathis here. You think tips are tax-free? Well, the $25,000 IRS rule isn't so simple. So have you heard the phrase, no tax on tips floating around lately? You heard President Trump, the pundits, all sort of folks on TikTok and Instagram touting the no tax on tips. And boy, there's gonna be all these strategies. We're gonna just take everything in tips and you won't pay any tax. But is it true? Well, maybe not. Let me explain. The IRS just dropped proposed regulation on how this is actually going to work, and I can tell you tax pros are scratching their heads. And let's break it down. The new law says that if you're a tipped worker, this is important, you may be able to deduct up to $25,000 of qualified tips from your taxable income. Emphasis on may. So while no tax on tips sounds good, as always, the devil is in the details, and here's where the confusion begins. First, what counts as qualified tip? You see, the IRS loves terms of art and loves to define them, and in this case, the term of art is qualified tips. What is qualified? I'm glad you asked. It has to be voluntary, given directly by a customer, and paid in cash, card, or something equivalent like a gift card. Does that make sense? Right. Well, then you might be asking yourself, well, what about Bitcoin, Venmo, crypto, right? They may not count. And other people are already saying, well, what about PayPal or app-based tipping? The regs don't really say, so this could be unqualified and thus taxable. Whoops. For those of us dealing with the IRS long enough, you know how quickly things can turn. If they decide something is not qualified, then they pounce. And it gets worse, right? The IRS published a list of about 68 occupations that qualify, like servers, bartenders, hotel staff, salon workers, folks like that. What about baristas, right? What about if you are somebody who's doing double dealing? You're a casino dealer, but you also run the poker room. What if you're a musician at a piano bar in a hotel lounge, right? What about Uber, DoorDash, delivery drivers, right? They're not in there. The boundaries are, there's some muddiness, right? The boundaries aren't clear. And this gets difficult for employers too, because they're now tasked, yes now, when I say now, I mean like this year, with tracking tips income for their employees. So aside from the fact that most payroll systems are not designed for the new law, just add some ambiguity, who actually qualifies, and you can get a mess, right? There's also the issue of voluntary versus mandatory. Only voluntary tips qualify. So if a restaurant automatically adds 18% service charges, that's still voluntary. The regs are pretty clear, only voluntary tips count, so you would seem probably not if they're mandating it, right? That's a gray area that could create an audit risk. What about tip pools? Like, for example, let's say that I am a server and I make money on tips and I share it with my bussers or whomever else in the restaurant. Does the server receive the entire amount and pay tax, or do they deduct the money given to the bussers? Does the server lose the deduction they give away? The regs don't really spell that out, and how is it being reported? On top of that, there's a carve-out for something called specified service trades or businesses, SSTBs. What this means is that if your employer's business is in law, consulting, performing arts, financial services, and a few others, you may not qualify at all, even if you personally earn tips. So imagine being a musician. Maybe you're working in a hotel lounge. Is that hospitality, which qualifies, or performing arts, which doesn't? It's not really clear yet. And then there's the phase-out rules. The law gives you up to $25,000 of deduction for tips, but that starts to shrink once your income crosses $150,000 if you're single, or $300,000 if you're married filing jointly. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong, right? You don't instantly, boom, lose the deduction if you go $1 over. Instead, it phases down gradually. So it's like $100 for every $1,000 your income goes over. And by the way, it's modified adjusted gross income is what they're using. So it's not your taxable income. You can actually move this number down depending on things that might allow adjustments like retirement plans. So let's just go back to this. Let's just say that you're making $160,000. you might only get a $24,000 deduction on your tips instead of 25. Keep climbing and eventually the deduction disappears completely. And I know some of you guys are like, well, they're making so much money, does it really matter? It seems like the law was there to benefit the folks that are really relying on those tips to make a living. And that the great, the bigger you go and the bigger your tips are. And I knew, by the way, plenty of folks, I'm in Vegas, that were making six figures that were just parking cars. Sounds weird, but hospitality is a big thing in my town. A lot of these dealers, they make a lot of money. If you're at a good restaurant, the servers make six figures. They're doing very well. All right. Finally, let's just go over this, that the employers are really the ones that are left holding the bag on the record keeping, right? They'll likely need to keep track of qualified tips separately and provide employees with an annual statement. Most payroll systems aren't really ready for this yet. In fact, we don't even know exactly how it's going to be reported, but businesses need to start adjusting now to prepare for what's going to happen. Actually, they're supposed to be doing it now, so I'm just going to say they need to be paying attention to this now. And speaking of payroll, this is something that you guys may not realize. Tips are still subject to employment taxes. Old age disability and survivors and Medicare, yes. It's still 15.3%. But I thought it was tax-free. Yeah, not exactly. Well, and then don't even get me started on state taxes, because not all states conform to the federal rules. If you live in one of the states without a state income tax, you're not going to have to worry about a tax on tips. And as of 2025, I think we had Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Washington, and Wyoming. Those are the tax-free states. Everybody else, it depends on whether you conform to the federal rule or whether you pass something else. So while the headline is no tax on tips, in reality it's much narrower. There's no federal tax on some tips up to $25,000, only in certain jobs and only if your income isn't too high. Until the IRS finalizes the regs and cleans up the gray areas, there's going to be confusion and lots of questions from taxpayers and professionals alike. Now, if you like this type of information, please like and subscribe. Share this with anybody that you want. And if you have comments about the no tax on tips or questions, put it in the comments below, and I'll see you later.